I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the Frankfurt Plant Board on January 10th, 2022 for the sole purpose of discussing and taking whatever action might be necessary to comply with federal rules regarding COVID testing and vaccination. So with that, Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Member DeLong?
Here.
Member Kuban?
Here.
Member Mason?
Here.
Member Snyder?
Here.
Member Dutton Mitchell?
Here.
We've got a quorum, and if it's all right with everyone, I was going to ask Hans to kind of give us a current status of the court case and outline kind of what actions we need to do at this point to comply, knowing that from everything we're reading, the court might take action anytime between now and the 1st of February. So Hans, you want to give us a quick overview and kind of what options we're looking at?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for meeting on your lunch hour. Just a little bit of background. Last fall, everybody knows OSHA issued their ETS, or their emergency temporary standard, on COVID in the workplace. The Fifth Circuit put in a stay on that rule. The Sixth Circuit put that rule back in place. So they undid the Fifth Circuit action. On Friday, the Supreme Court heard arguments about that ETS. No word yet as to whether that rule has survived. No Supreme Court opinion as of this moment. The rule requires that employers with 100 or more employees adopt a policy that either requires vaccination or allows for vaccination and testing. The policy that we submitted to the board for your all's consideration is one that provides for vaccination and or testing. The language in that policy is pulled directly from the template that OSHA provided on their website. One of the questions for the employer is whether to pay for the cost of testing, time to test, items like that. The ETS itself does not mandate that the employer pay. However, the ETS does go on to say other laws may require you to pay, and that is correct. Wage and hour laws require you to pay the time that an employee spends preparing for work. There are cases that deal with donning and doffing of safety gear like paint equipment that require payment for that time. So this has been held analogous to that. And I talked briefly with Mr. Schneider this morning. There is a case, KRS 336-220, that requires employers to pay the cost of medical examinations. And just very shortly after Mr. Schneider and I spoke, the KLC sent around a newsletter to their listserv that had had a copy of that statute attached to it. So that's going to be a consideration for Kentucky employers. So based on those cases in this statute, I would recommend that the plant board pay for the cost of the testing and the cost of the time to test. We'll better know. The staff will better know the cost of testing and so forth once we have a roster of who is vaccinated and who is not vaccinated. And that's one element that the rule requires employers to prepare that roster. As far as where are we going to get tests at, I've heard some questions about that. That's a very good question, obviously. There was an article yesterday in the Courier Journal on page 17A that talked about the federal testing that they're getting ready to do. And it said last week the federal government let a $51 million contract and then a second $13 million contract to provide home testing kits, COVID-19 home testing kits. They're going to be a total of 500 million, but test kits that says will be delivered in batches over several months. So that's one possible source. Other possible sources may be the state price contracts. Kim and I talked briefly last week, and once this rule sticks, for lack of a better term, I think you'll see providers start to crop up with, we're selling testing kits, we're selling COVID management services, and that type of thing for the board to consider. As Mr. Kuban noted, we've surveyed some other employers. They're taking largely the same approach we are. I saw an email on the listserv this morning from Georgetown city attorney. They're doing the same thing we are today. They're going to adopt a policy and then kind of go forward from there. I've got a call scheduled today at 1:30 with Lexington's safety director to see what they're up to over in Lexington, and I'll ask them about where are y'all thinking about getting test kits and that type of thing. So what I'd like to do today is ask the board move to approve this policy, and then let the general manager and the staff have the administrative discretion to get it implemented as things move forward, as things evolve. And it may very well be the Supreme Court says no, the rule doesn't withstand scrutiny, and we don't have to do anything, and we may have to move forward. But this is sort of the first step in getting things done and being able to point to something that says, yes, we're making good faith efforts to comply with this new rule. So that's all. Excuse me. That's all. That's all I have for the moment. And if anyone has any questions, thank you.
Well, let me do this at this point, open it up. Does anybody have any questions of Hans?
Well, John, excuse me, John, I still have a question about the cost. I mean, I just read the KRS language, and I'm not sure, and I'm totally could be wrong here, that this situation is not the regular routine required medical exam. And because of that, and because we don't know what a cost would be per person to do that, I'd rather leave that part vague right now. Approve a policy, but the Georgetown policy didn't seem to have a statement on who bore the cost of the test. I'd rather leave that part vague until we get a handle on what this costs, because, judging on what we've seen, what's been communicated to us, it could become costly, on one end of it anyway.
Well, I think one thing that, just chime in real quick here, one thing that we'll be finding out here fairly soon is how many tests are we talking about? We really don't know at this point how many employees might need to take the test. And two, I mean, I think if there's a way that it's approved, and I know JC, you've looked at it, if there's a way that the self-test kits, which would be the least expensive option, could be available and meets the requirements, that would be the least disruptive. I mean, I think it would be really costly if we have, say, 50, 60 employees. I'm just throwing that number out there. And they all end up going to their private providers. And then we either have to hire a coordinator or somehow keep track of 50 or 60 people who are getting the test results coming in late, being delayed. It'd be nice if we could either latch on to the city, county, school board, state government in terms of how they test, and provide some option for employees to all test at a central place, which would be probably the least expensive. But I'm just throwing it out. John, I know you had your hand up there.
Yeah, John, those are all good points. And when I talked with Hans earlier this morning, I don't know what the state OSHA interpretation of that 266. I don't know what their interpretation of that's going to be. And I agree with Steve. I don't think we know that. I think Hans is right. If this thing sticks, we're going to have a cottage industry of folks willing to do this for us. And I think the price will probably be driven down somewhat. I'm almost in agreement with Steve, though. It's for right now. We can come back and amend this policy anytime we want to. But for now, my understanding of what we need to do is we need to find out where we stand. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what the OSHA rule said is you've got to start finding out where you stand starting about now. I mean, we looked at Bowling Green, sent us some information. They're not going to start anything until February at the earliest. So, I think I'm fine leaving out the stuff about who pays for the test and maybe crossing that bridge when we come to it. I think that's a good idea.
Catherine? Jason?
Mr. Chair, so the policy, the OSHA policy, which we're basically utilizing, talks about leave for vaccination. Mm-hmm. And, Hans brought up his research about wage and hour laws and how they intersect with all this. So, I mean, the policy again speaks to leave for vaccination, but not for leave for testing. And I think that could also be a very costly issue if we're leaving it up to people to go get tested.
Mhm.
I mean, that could amount to many. So I think trying to do it on site or providing test kits would be the best. I'm okay with leaving it blank and directing staff to source free and reduced testing, COVID management, and kind of bring it back to us. The other thing I was going to bring up is the MSD policy.
Mm-hmm.
It expands the their policy to cover board members, consultants, all that. Hans, do you think under OSHA's standard or ETS that's required?
That's a good question. As far as there's no real interpretation of, you know, who's an employee. Now, that's a good question of, you know, the contractors and so forth. I personally would not want to get contractors, you know, maybe a board member perhaps if you're considered an employee, but that's I would not want to test anybody I didn't have to, or get vaccination records from anybody I didn't have to, because I have to maintain those records. I have to make sure they're secure. And if I don't have to have anybody's medical records or for anything, then I would rather not have it.
Well, if you have to expand to vendors, then that would get into people that we buy telephone poles from, that we buy any equipment from. It would go, just ripple and then does it. I mean, there are actually, if you start getting into contractors and subcontractors and vendors, there's no end to it. I mean,
well, they do limit it to those type people that are actually working in leased or operated facilities. But, you know, so,
yeah.
And it specifically excludes delivery services. So it would be like if we have somebody on contract that's coming into the building regularly. I just
the guys doing the reservoir, you know,
Yeah.
the contractors working on the reservoir.
right. And I do think it leaves it up to their employers to essentially follow our standard and submit proof to us, not so that, you know, it alleviates us from actually having the medical records or whatever. But anyway, I just didn't know if we'd put any thought into that, or if we would just handle, I mean, I'm assuming we have posted masking required for anyone that comes in the building.
The masking will be required. My understanding, I'll let JC, and if you're unvaccinated starting today, you're wearing a mask unless you're in an enclosed office working alone. So let's say anybody in the building would have a mask on. Is the way I would.
Right now we don't have that in effect.
But that goes into effect today, I think. Masking.
Well, we haven't adopted the policy, so we haven't put anything. Yeah, I mean.
But the rule, that's what the rule, I think that's what the rule would say. If you're not vaccinated and you have to wear a mask at work unless, you know, unless you're alone in your office, in an enclosed office, I think. That's
Hans, what do we today? As I understand it, if for down the road, assuming the Supreme Court upholds this and doesn't issue a stay, we need to proceed with polling our employees to determine how many tests we have to do. We need a masking policy to post. Is there any other requirements that in order to show good faith and compliance, is there any other things we have to do between now and February to be in compliance with the federal directive, including obviously working towards developing some, I mean, like we mentioned and Catherine mentioned, the self kits would probably be the least expensive and the least intrusive, but obviously we'll have to find a vendor because they're like gold anywhere else. You can't find them. And I guess if the federal government is going to do it, of course, if the federal government buys up several 100 million kits, there won't be any other kits out there. I mean, they'll buy up the market. So instead of going up in price, they actually could, instead of going down in price, they could go up.
Drive it up, sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What is there anything else we have to do? What do we need to do today to be in compliance and to be given you all directive towards implementing in February?
Today, I think I would ask that the board approve the policy since it's this is OSHA's suggested language verbatim. That would point to good faith efforts. I think we could start compiling the roster. You know, if you're vaccinated, please provide your record of vaccination. Then we would be able to answer the board's questions of how many people do we need to test and how much is this going to cost potentially. And then we could come back, you know, probably have a brief special meeting or sometime in February to implement get a testing vendor. Perhaps the rule says that the initial rule that was published says you're going to be tested by February 9th, I think it was. But if you're not vaccinated completely by the 9th, I think you could have some type of testing in place going for that. So you'd be all right in that sense. But we would need to get the roster developed. Then you know how many people you have. Then you know where you can get the best pricing for the test kits today. And then you'd be ready to go by February the 9th. And I think Kim had mentioned though that, and I saw some stuff briefly this morning that from KLC that state OSHA may move these dates back a little bit. So that gives us some time to figure out exactly how many people we have before there'll be a state parallel rule. But for the immediate point to your question, Mr. Cubine, I think we approve the policy and begin developing our roster today. That would be my suggestion.
Jason, did you have any comments, questions?
I'm kind of leaning with John and Steve on their considerations. We don't know what we don't know. And so until we can create that roster to be able to figure out how many people we may need to test for, and then really what are the options for testing. John, you know me and you looked into this a little bit on our own.
Yeah. And
it's such an rapidly evolving situation. And that's kind of snuck up on everybody in the last few weeks. I would say that, so we kind of go with what Hans is saying, but also I know you guys have looked at a lot of this through 2021, probably earlier in 2021 as a board where I wasn't on the board. What other policies or practices do we have in place right now for contact tracing among staff? And maybe someone could update me on the side on that or get me up to speed, just so I understand what we're collecting currently or what are the policies around contact tracing or anything like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Kim or Hans, I don't think other than adhering to and consulting with on a regular basis the local health department and following those requirements, and that, I don't think we've done anything special, have we, Hans?
I think we're following the CDC's guidance as it changed over time. So whatever the CDC's kind of recommending is what, you know, I know that's changed here recently too. I know Kim has dealt with that a little bit here in the last week.
And I know anytime
we have a
case, I'm sorry.
We do have a healthy at work protocol that and it's been recently updated. I'll be happy to send that to you, Mr. Lumber.
And I know whenever we've had an active case, we've always consulted with the health department, whatever, how to handle it, what we're supposed to do or whatever.
Yeah, we handle that internally, but we're following their the CDC and the health department's guidelines as they get updated. Like sometimes they change from one day it's one thing and one day the next, and then it's back to the first thing. So
Yeah.
it's kind of.
Well, I guess I just want to minimize disruption. Everybody, this is
Sure
for everybody. So minimize, if we can centralize testing to make it as easy as possible for staff, and then also just record keeping and not making Hans's job too hard to kind of stay on top of all this. I think we need to look into doing that and figuring out how to set that up. What the options are for doing that.
And you would think, and Hans and I've talked some about it, state government has, I can't remember, Steve or John, you might know, probably what, 5 to 10,000 employees in Franklin County. Then the rest are spread out. So the state's got to implement something, not only in Franklin County, but in 120 counties. And a lot of them state employees don't reside in Franklin County. So they're in different counties. And you think certainly the state government, and I know, Hans, you've been trying to keep in touch with the city, the county, and the school boards. I mean, Franklin County itself is going to be a huge task for testing all the employers who are impacted by this.
The last report, our new Teresa Cook, our HR, she used to work in the personnel, and she's to their knowledge, nobody's been surveyed in the state as of yet. I don't know that as far as vaccination status records and so forth. So developing the roster for 200 people won't be that won't be an insurmountable challenge. But as Mr. Cubine noted, you got 30,000 people spread across the Commonwealth. From Pikeville to Paducah, that's a lot to compile.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
On page 4, we did insert in proposed language about employees scheduling testing and vaccination times with their supervisor to minimize disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also says, and use applicable available additional paid sick leave time. Was the thought on that is to use that time for vaccination or testing time, or just if they're symptomatic?
That was to use it for the testing or to test or to vaccinate. That the APSL was the COVID, the extra 80 hours I think that the board had granted last year sometime to allow people to use that, and that can be changed at the boards, with management, and that's one of those things that we might modify as we go along and get it, depending on how many people need to test and what sources are available. But that was just sort of an initial pass at what might be an approach to address it.
Well, so I guess with adding that language, we have kind of covered basically paying for testing time. And then I'll point out later down on that same page, it does reference the CDC's isolation guidance,
Mm-hmm.
and it references 10 days. And I think, hasn't that been changed to 5?
It has.
That I'm not sure.
It has, ma'am.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
So we
I think since this went out, that's been changed.
Yeah, so we would have to change that if we're going to adopt this.
And Ms. Dutton Mitchell, the reply for the APSL, that was for if they had side effects from the vaccination. So they would be eligible, not for testing necessarily, but for if they received the vaccination and had side effects where they needed to be off from work, then they would be eligible to use APSL time if they haven't already exhausted their 80 hours.
Okay, so that doesn't cover the testing time. All right.
Hopefully before we get to February, if we can find either if the self-tests work or if we can get them and if they're allowable, or if we can find a coordinated testing provider, hopefully employees wouldn't have to take off or use any time. We could arrange for something maybe on Monday mornings or Wednesday mornings or something where a provider could come do the testing, or I mean, we could hopefully find an expedited and a very fast way to do this. Because, you know, again, I go back to, you know, state government here in Franklin County. If you tell all the employees who are unvaccinated, I don't know how many that is, but all of them, they got to go find a provider every week to do a test. I mean, it will just, I mean, it's going to just really bog down everything. I mean, let alone getting the results back time.
John, I do think I'm piggybacking on what you're saying is that we do need to explore the possibility that we do the administration of it because of that. But I also think as far as the time goes, the sick time, the additional sick time, that has to be sort of clarified and focused, because there's some exploitation in that number if an employee wants to do it. You know, there might be a reward not to be tested using that sick time. So there needs to be some clarification on when that sick time can be used and when it cannot be used and when it's not available to be used.
John, I do think something while we're talking about this roster and potential testing. What are people's thoughts on confidentiality? I mean, and we're starting to get on this level of people's vaccination status being some level of confidential. Has anybody responded to that or react to that? I mean, not sharing with us per se, but maybe with their coworkers and things like that. Is that a concern?
You maintain the records in the same way. You maintain them in a confidential manner. You don't commingle them with the rest of the personnel file. You would keep somebody's vaccination status separate from your regular personnel records. But you need to get that record, you know, according to the rule, which is that's one reason why I kind of lean away from. I don't want to test. I was looking back to Ms. Dutton's question with, you know, the rule said references 100 or more employees. So if somebody's a contractor, a delivery person, I would not want their records to, you know, to be in my possession. The example I thought of, just, you know, you have somebody that's got a vaccination card, you make your copy of it, you put it in a folder, and that's kept separately from the employee's personnel record, and then you have your roster built that way.
But I think Jason brings up a good point, Hans. And of course, the OSHA rule directs that you have to do this testing. So the OSHA rule kind of steps in the middle of HIPAA.
Yes.
But so say, let's just pick a number. Say we've got 50 employees that need to be tested. Well, if they all have to come in on Monday morning and bring their self-test, or we have a provider there and everybody has to go get swabbed, everybody's going to know who's not vaccinated.
Well, that's true. You sort of know by, you know, just by who's there. But I don't, like I say, that's just one thing that would have to be, you know, you try to work around, try to work out.
I mean, OSHA, we've got one federal agency stepping in the middle of another federal agency's rule, because OSHA basically said you got to do this, and it's almost impossible for an employer, you know, like a state government, school system, whatever, for it not to be pretty obvious after a couple of weeks who's getting tested.
Well, it's also obvious in the sense that it says if you're not vaccinated, you're going to wear a mask, and, you know, but, you know, here, you know, you're going to wear a mask in the workplace, and so the inference from that is you're unvaccinated.
Yeah.
Somebody can ascertain something about your medical status, your vaccination status. So good points. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, Mr. Snyder, as always, I turn to you for your wordsmanship and your wisdom. Have you got a motion for us?
I think we probably want to eliminate, and what I would suggest would be to amend and have staff eliminate the question language on page 5, regarding the cost of the testing and just leave in employees shall test weekly. Testing shall be accomplished with the approved testing kits or approved sites. And then all the rest of that language, those three questions, those three bullet points, that needs to be eliminated from this document for now, because we will go ahead and put it back in. That's the only amendment that I would like to make, that I like to move right now on this document. Otherwise, I'd like to pass it with that amendment. I'd like to make that.
The policy that we'd be adopting would authorize the collection from staff of who needs to test.
Yes.
And
yes.
also give Kim the authority to post her signs. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Kim,
are you good with that?
Yes, I guess my one question is, and if the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling today and you all pass this, do we drop all this, or do we continue forward?
I mean, I think, to me, if the Supreme Court issues a stay or actually rules, and I know some of the news things that said that based on some of the questioning, they might actually rule that it was too broad or too much of an overreach without legislative action, then I would assume that we would go back to what we looked like at the close of business on Friday, because the authority to do all this goes away then. Is that correct, Hans?
You could stop, once if the Supreme Court, look what Kim said, it would depend on what their ruling is.
Right.
If they just issued a stay, I would probably move forward and kind of prepare on my roster so we can get cost estimates for the board. But if they came out and said, no, this doesn't withstand scrutiny at all, then I might stop and wait and see what's OSHA going to do at that point, whether they go back and just make it by a regular rulemaking process, but if they said there's nothing to do, I would probably go back to what we were doing Friday and just hold up with everything. Because
would you be open, John, to
Chairman?
add? Yes, sir.
Why don't we go ahead and approve that, and then we can make a separate motion that talks about what happens to this document and what happens in case the Supreme Court gives a ruling one way or the other.
And give Gary the authority, subject to what
Yes.
federal action to.
Yes.
Okay.
I would almost prefer it be in two separate. I would almost prefer it be in two separate motions. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Okay. Steve, Jason, Catherine.
What about just saying contingent upon the Supreme Court ruling?
That's fine with me. If you want to do that, that's fine. Well, I'll amend that motion to contingent upon the Supreme Court not completely putting a halt to this entire OSHA mandate, that we approve the policy presented to us with the payment for testing language eliminated, which will be addressed at a later date.
Okay. Hans, have you got all that?
Yes, sir. I believe that'll get the job done today. We'll delete
Chair? Yeah.
Yes.
I'll just point out again the other amendment we have to make in this draft on page 4, the 10 days to 5 days.
Yes. Yeah, to bring it into compliance with current CDC. So we have the policy in front of us with the amendments recommended by Catherine and by John, and with the contingency language suggested by Steve. Hans, Kim, Nichelle? Does that take care of what y'all need to do?
Yes.
On the CDC guidance part, if we can have permission to work on that language where we don't have to keep coming back and amending that every time.
Yeah.
John, what if you put in there the part where Catherine was talking about where the change was, some language that says that our policy shall stay consistent with current CDC.
Yeah,
and
I think that's what she's saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's what Kim just said, kind of.
Okay.
Okay. So does that, do y'all feel comfortable then from administratively what we've got to do there?
sir.
Okay, so we got John's motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Because we can order out for pizza, you know. Of course, it'd be delivered to your home, so I don't know how that's gonna work, but anyway.
I don't have a problem going home.
Is that? We have a motion second, see no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion's adopted. And obviously, we've got a board meeting coming up in a couple of weeks that we'll get to revisit this, maybe have some more information from either, you know, other employers here in town, or we'll definitely know at that point what the Supreme Court did. So with that, seeing no further, we can't do any other business. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.